Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who has persevered through that slight delay there. The joys of virtual events, of course, as we're all getting used to in this day and age. My name is Sarah Meredith. I wasn't meant to be the moderator today, but unfortunately, Colin Foreman is run into a bit of technical difficulty. So it's my pleasure to step in and also to be working with such a fantastic panel on such an interesting topic today, looking at PPP and social infrastructure projects. On behalf of MEED, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. We've got a really interesting breadth and representation of different sectors and geographies here today, so I'm looking forward to getting started. In terms of housekeeping, if anyone is just joining us now for this session, there is a chat box. You're welcome to pop any questions into that at any time. I will do my best to keep an eye on that. We're going to start with a bit of moderated discussion and introduction from our panelists, but certainly towards the end and throughout the session, I'll be keeping an eye on those questions and trying to direct them to our panelists accordingly. So please keep your questions coming. Just quickly, in terms of introduction, I'll ask each of the panelists to say a few words about themselves. But before we start with that, I'll say who we've got joining us here today. Firstly, we have Sue Barrett, Director of Infrastructure for Turkey, Middle East and Africa, Sustainable Infrastructure Group. Sue, would you mind saying a few words, please, about yourself and your organization?
Not at all. Thank you very much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking MEED for inviting me to participate in this very timely panel on social infrastructure. As Sarah said, I'm Sue Barrett. I'm the Director for Infrastructure in Turkey, the Middle East and Africa at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or EBRD. You may know us as EBRD. EBRD countries of operation in the MENA region currently include Jordan, Lebanon, Gaza and West Bank, Egypt, Morocco and Tunisia. Having said that, we are expanding in this region. Libya became a member of the EBRD in 2019. And this is an important key step to them at some point in the future, maybe seeking country of operation status. If any of you were following our annual meeting last week, you will have seen that our Board of Governors has approved the membership of Iraq to the EBRD. And in addition to that, the UAE and Algeria were invited to join as observers to our annual meeting. And that is in anticipation of those regions and countries joining us as members of the EBRD at some point in the future. Algeria being the most advanced, they're currently in the process of finalising their application. Within this region, I'm responsible for transport and municipal infrastructure, which includes social infrastructure. And the financing that we do is everything on the scale from sovereign to sub-sovereign to private sector, and including PPPs. To date, actually, most of our activity in social infrastructure has been in the PPP space. It's involved financing hospital PPP programs and also developing school PPPs. We also see some activity in terms of energy efficiency in public buildings, which include schools, hospitals, etc. So with that, I'm very much looking forward to participating in this panel on social infrastructure, sharing the experience and lessons learned by the EBRD, with a particular focus on looking at issues around, I hope, value for money and bankability, which are very important in this sector. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sue. Fantastic. Okay, now I'd like to ask Mr. Musad Al-Razuki, Privatization Transaction Management Executive Director at Tatweer Building Company, to say a few words about himself and of course, a little bit more about Tatweer as well and the work that you guys are doing with schools in the education sector.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody here. Good evening. This is Musad Al-Razuki. I'm from Tatweer Building Company, looking after the privatization or the PPP sector of Tatweer Building Company. Today we are with TBC, we are focusing on social infrastructure, in particular the school PPP. However, we are now basically researching or marketing ourselves among other sectors within the education and beyond education as well. TBC is not only doing PPP. TBC, when it was started for the purpose of the education infrastructure for Ministry of Education. However, over the past few years, TBC has geared up itself and went beyond the education sector. We have projects now at different sector, tourism and airports and other projects. In PPP, we just started in PPP 3 years ago, and we are building the capacity and the experience of TBC on that realm, and inshallah we are moving ahead with our full agenda to cover multiple sectors and other services. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Okay, and next I want to bring it to Sachin Karia, partner at Allen & Overy. Sachin, if you can say a few words, please, about yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much for the invite to participate, and I'm privileged to participate on the panel with so many distinguished people, and some of you I've worked with before, and some I would hope to work with in the future. So my name is Sachin Karia. I head the PPP practice at Allen & Overy in the MENA region, and we're currently working on a number of different PPP projects for the Saudi government, for the governments in the Emirates and elsewhere, and we're seeing an enormous increase in the interest in this sector and from governments, and obviously then the private sector also joined. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time, and as Sue said, it's opportune to have this at this point, given what we're seeing in the market. Thank you.
Fantastic. Right, and then moving on, last but not least, Dr. Musad Al-Razuki. Very excited to hear what you have to say today about the work that you guys are doing in healthcare. Please, if you wanted to say a few words here to kick things off.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's a pleasure to be here. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you around the world. My background is as a maxillofacial surgeon. However, in 2014, I joined the Kuwait Life Sciences Company, which is part of the Kuwait Investment Authority, the sovereign wealth fund of Kuwait. We are focused on the healthcare industry as well as the broader life sciences industry. Our primary modus operandi actually is investing in international companies and then bringing those technologies as part of a technology transfer into the Middle East, obviously with a preference for a whole market of Kuwait. I believe, as many of you I think will echo, that this year really has been the year for healthcare and the year for the life sciences industry. We really a tale of two cities if we compare it with the other major social industry, which is the education industry. It seems that as the healthcare industry is achieving newer and newer heights, the education industry is scrambling to redefine itself the same way, let's say, the media industry has in the past. From our side, we are now very heavily focused with a lot of leading, let's say, pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies on financing a new drug, both a new vaccine as well as treatments for the COVID-19 pandemic. We are also very focused on PPE, both investment and as well as distribution here in the Middle East. And last but not least, we're also working with a lot of companies on different medtech solutions, whether it is new diagnostics or even actually just a simple, let's say, a new safety measure or a new technology in terms of medtech that will help with the sterilization processes within the hospital, so on and so forth. So from our side, we are again heavily focused as investors in the life sciences and the healthcare industry space. We have worked also very closely with different governments around the region, primarily with our government here in Kuwait and the Ministry of Health on various PPPs. I believe the panel will get, let's say, into detail about how these PPPs need to be redefined, so I'll save that for later. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to your questions as well.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you again to all of our panelists. To get started with the discussion here today, I think I want to kind of take it to Musad and to talk a little bit about some of the recent school signings, school PPP signings that you've had in Saudi Arabia. Can you tell us about some of the developments that you guys have had there recently?
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Recently, we have achieved one of its kind, and certainly the first in the social infrastructure deal. TBC been working on this for the last 3 years. We had a very successful team head by HSBC as a financial advisor, and we have Sachin and his team as a legal advisor, and we have ACOM as a technical advisor. Together with with other government agencies, we've been able to put together a very interesting and very successful structure that get international and national interest. Many international companies and lenders have shown interest to participate in this project. We have the expectations was to receive for a new transactions. Usually we don't receive a lot of interest in the market, but in our transaction we have received a lot of interest from international and national developers and lenders, and together successfully we have been through all the transaction stage until we get the commercial close last week. With that, we can say we have successfully moved the market, both in the developer side and the lender side, and today we have scored the new precedent in the market in terms of what banks can accept, what developer can accept in terms of the risk allocation and other, for example, and I will refer to Sachin here for some technicality, but I will give an example. In Saudi, it's the first time that banks has accepted to finance the project without a guarantee from the government, and also for the first time in Saudi market, the bank has accepted a deal that has a haircut concept, payment in case of donation, and other aspects. There are a lot of technicality, and what better to speak about it, my colleague Sachin here. He's the head of the legal who's working with us.
Fantastic. And actually, Sachin, I'd love to get your input on this as well, and particularly around how maybe the counterparts in other countries that are looking to try and set up similar frameworks to build schools in their countries. What kind of lessons can they learn from the experience you guys have gone through in Saudi, and make sure that they're working on sustainable kind of projects going forward?
Sure, thank you. Look, I think Musab is being a little modest here. I think when we first got involved with this initiative, there was a lot of ambition, and there was a lot of ambition to change the market, to get deals for governments that are much more favorable than what they had previously. And I must say, initially I was a skeptic, and I was like, are we going to be able to do that? But the quality of the TBC team led by Musab and the support of the stakeholders in Saudi Arabia and the ambition of the government, I think got us over the line. And we've got a deal that had enormous interest from very high quality consortia, both local and international. A lot of interest from the lenders, again, both local and international. And in the end, they've got a deal that no one else has been able to get that favorable a deal away in the region. And what contributed to it, I would say first and foremost, is the quality of the procurer team. I think TBC hiring individuals of the quality of Musab and his team is absolutely critical in delivering value, because they understand it. Where there are boring legal points that I'd get late night phone calls from Musab saying, please explain this to me and how it works, and I want to understand better. And it's that drive for learning and knowledge that team demonstrated that I thought was exceptional. I think, look, they hired absolutely the best quality of advisors. I mean, you look at HSBC, They are absolutely the market leaders. ACOM, again, I have a huge amount of respect for them, market lead. And so they had quality advisors who led them through a process, who knew the market, who knew what lenders wanted, who knew what developers were looking, and who knew what to push and where we could get an advantageous position without going out. And the last thing you want to do as a government is go out there with a deal that is too ambitious, that's going to fail.
Right.
So you want successes. So you've got to judge how close to the edge do I go to push the market to get the best deal for the government without ending up in a failed project, right? And I thought that judgment from them was excellent. And they got all their bits and bobs ready, whether it's the site, the permissions, they all got them ready in time. And that enabled them to do a deal. And you've got to remember, they got commercial close in an environment of COVID. How many other deals have closed in a COVID environment? And they got the banks there, they got the sponsors there, they got all the stakeholders there. And so a huge credit to Musad and his team. I thought it was a fantastic deal and a really fun one to be involved in, actually.
Well, thank you. If you allow me, Sarah, here, and I think thank you, Sachin, for the kind word. I think now it is, basically it is the government mindset has changed. I would say the Ministry of Finance in particular and National Center of Privatization, the mindset now is definitely different than the mindset a few years ago. Today, the government wants this new regime of projects. The old way of doing, capex allocations, etc. It doesn't work anymore. And we have seen a lot of evidence to that. Now, this is the way to do projects, not only on social infrastructure, in all, I would say, all capex project in the government. And heads up also to our advisory team who help us through this. And now we have, successfully closed this. Just looking up now, we have we closed 60 schools. The project that we're talking about is 60 schools in Mecca and Jeddah. It's one of its kind, but it's only the tip of the iceberg, if we say. We have approved program of 1,500 schools, and there are, we are welcoming others to come and join us in this journey. We would like people to come and see what we have to offer. Currently, we are tendering a new project and going to be in, the RFP will go to the qualified bidders within a week or two. We will, our target.
And that's also within education, is it? Or it's one of the other sectors you said you're looking to maybe expand into?
We have this in education, and inshallah, we will have other in other sectors. Particularly, we have 1,500 program, 1,500 schools program that we will target to tender in the coming years.
Fantastic. Well, we had anyone who joined us this morning would have heard a fair amount of talk about sovereign guarantees. You've mentioned here that you've had a really successful situation without the government backing. Sue, how are you seeing this across different regions? Or maybe I should throw this back to Sachin, actually. I mean, what are you seeing as the role of sovereign guarantees in some of these projects at the moment, and how important is that?
I mean, look, I think it's easy to get fixated on the concept of sovereign guarantees. You've got to bear in mind, the whole reason for a guarantee is credit support, right? And so you've got to look at the underlying credit of the procurer and the underlying credit and their ability to meet their obligations under the agreement. So if your credit is already there at procurement level, you don't need a sovereign guarantee, is my view. Guarantees are merely there to support what is, if the credit is not good enough. That's number one. And number two, I think where you've got governments procuring, I think the private sector looks at the past track record. So, if you've got successful procuring by entities over a long period, then you can certainly structure the, and there is a weaker credit, then you can structure the support that the government provides in different ways and be successful without having a sovereign guarantee in place. There are other ways that I think you can deal with some of the risks involved. But I'm sure at some point Sue is going to come and tell me it depends on the country. It depends on the country and the track record of the country, and the credit of the relevant sovereign plays a great part in all of this. But let me defer to Sue, because I think EBRD look at some of the more interesting countries in the region, and I think have amazing experience and can bring a lot to the table on that.
I think that that's right. What you're saying, I would agree with. And I mean, there is a big role in the region that I'm covering, whether it's the MENA region or more broadly that the EBRD is covering, where a lot of the infrastructure assets remain in the ownership of the state, and so therefore you do see a lot of sovereign financing happening. But when you're structuring a PPP, you're doing it for a reason. You want to bring in the private sector, and you want to get it. You want to create a project finance structure. And I would say that if you're requiring a sovereign guarantee on top of that, then there's something wrong with your project finance structure. You should, as Sachin was saying, you should be able to allocate the risks in an appropriate way. You should be able to put in place the securities, et cetera, that allow you to structure that project in such a way that you don't need recourse to the sovereign. In some cases, we do find in some PPPs where the law is not adequate and doesn't allow for things like international arbitration, shall we say. We see this sometimes in the municipal sector. As a lender, we may say, well, actually, we can't take a project finance risk here, but we wouldn't necessarily go back to the government. We'd probably more likely go to the sponsor and require a corporate guarantee. So, I think sovereign lending sort of has its place, but let's face it, at this time, with COVID, with the strain on budgets, governments really need to start looking at how they can mobilize private sector funding and not do it on their directly on their own balance sheets. And I think with good structuring, you can achieve project finance structures in most countries. And obviously there'll be some, or certainly in EBRD's region, we are looking at PPPs in some of the smallest countries. But generally speaking, I think you can structure a PPP in such a way that you don't need a sovereign guarantee. In fact, we don't have sovereign guarantees with ours. I suppose the closest you get to a sovereign guarantee would be the PPPs in Turkey, which have debt assumption. And that means that if the project goes bad, the government will assume the debt. So, it's quite close to a sovereign guarantee, but it's not exactly a sovereign guarantee.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Moving now, I want to touch in on healthcare and hear how PPPs projects are being structured, specifically in Kuwait. Dr. Musad, I'll hand it over to you, but also I believe you guys are engaged in projects around the region as well. So please, if you can tell us a little bit about how you're seeing this play out in hospitals and clinics, etc.
Absolutely. I've been personally involved with multiple PPPs in the region since 2010, and it seems that the third P in PPP is not really being focused on, and that is partnership. Today, we see that a lot of governments are looking to outsource the technical or implementation risk, and the private sector, which is the first part of the second P in the PPP, is looking to offset or let's say outsource the financial risk on the state governments. And we need to come up with a new realization, actually. So the traditional model in healthcare has been that the government will donate the land, will make sure that all the licenses and everything go, let's say, a bit more smoothly than the current process. For example, in Kuwait, if you were to pursue a typical government tender, it would take about 2 years to infinity, whereas with a PPP, it would be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, although we have very few examples of successful PPPs in general, not just in the healthcare sector. I believe that in terms of, let's say, this PropCo-OpCo split, we should look at a more, again, let's say, synergistic relationship between both the public and private sector, where they really, from the beginning, decide on the right sustainable economic model, the right sustainable unit economics that will allow this enterprise to flourish, in the private sector without the continued support of the government. For example, in healthcare, that might mean coming up with a revenue model where employers from the private sector, as opposed to the government, take some of the healthcare insurance risk, so that the government itself is not putting the bill of the future healthcare of both the expats and the local populations here in the Middle East. In general, I also believe that we need to focus a little bit more on prevention. So that doesn't really, if you think about preventative healthcare, that doesn't really lead itself to a large, huge mega hospital, right? We see that many nations in the West, such as the UK and Italy and Europe, and even some states in the United States, are actually decreasing the number of hospital beds and recommissioning some old hospital sites into other forms of social infrastructure. Certainly, the healthcare system of the future, especially in the post-COVID-19 world, is not one fully reliant on hospitals. Instead, yes, we should focus more on prevention. We should focus more on testing. And this crisis has really showed us the importance of, not just PCR, but even having a rapid test to resume whatever this new normal will be. And then also other, let's say, soft healthcare or life science industries, such as vaccine production or any type of new biotechnologies. So that would be, I guess, my push, actually, and that's something that we are actively working, at least here in Kuwait, with our own government, with the Ministry of Health. And I also want to say that I do understand that the ministries of health in the Middle East are at the front line, so they don't have the benefit to sit back and take long-term strategic thinking into consideration. But that is our job as a long-term investor in the life sciences and healthcare space, to really encourage them to come up with a more sustainable model for the future.
You mentioned at the beginning of your statement there around the different models that are workable here. I mean, what projects or models can we look at to reduce risk, and of course wearing your investor hat as well, and attract private investors into some of these ventures?
Absolutely. So one model I like is with the Jerry Fund in Europe, for example, where I believe it's the European Commission, or I can't remember the exact name of the financing institution, will match any private investment in a European early stage technology company. And unfortunately today, such matching funds are extremely limited here in the region, if not non-existent, when it comes to life sciences and the healthcare industry. As you know, it takes on average 10 years to bring a new drug to market. If you talk about vaccines, the fastest ever our human race has developed a vaccine was the mumps vaccine back in the 1960s, and that took 4 years. So today, as we rush to develop a vaccine for COVID, unfortunately, the Middle East, with the exception of a few trials being done in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, has a very passive role when it comes to actually being at the forefront of developing this, a new biotechnology. And certainly we see huge developments, especially in Saudi Arabia, when it comes to the university or the academic medical centers, such as King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which I highly commend, having not only a transparent forecasting of their endowment, but also has really done a lot to prop up the life sciences industry. And certainly we need more of these examples. And definitely, I think financing is one part of the solution, but then we have to remember that hospital buildings themselves do not treat patients, right? And labs themselves, the infrastructure does not create a new type of technology or a new type of therapeutic or diagnostic without the human capital element. Unfortunately, there is a huge brain drain of Arab talent going to the US and to Europe and other innovation centers. We need to find ways to keep, or at least bring back, some of that talent, and to really develop a continuum of scientific research between the West and the Middle East.
That you've touched on a couple of things that I want to come back to, certainly around service delivery, etc. Before we do, though, I want to hand it back to Sue. When we're talking about financing and bankability, what are development banks like EBRD and the lending and investment community looking for in a social infrastructure PPP?
Well, I think what I will say won't really surprise anyone, and in fact, we've heard some of these comments already on this panel discussion. I think EBRD would look at this from both a development perspective and also a financing perspective. Of course, the two are linked; they're interlinked. So, from a development perspective, our starting point would be to look at the laws, the regulations in a country to make sure that there is an appropriate enabling environment for a PPP to be structured and tendered, and it's not always the case that you will find this. And if this is what we see, that either then as a development institution, we will provide the technical assistance and the technical help to help the government to put that in place. So that's sort of the first thing. Then from a bankability perspective, what we want to see is a good feasibility study, which looks at all of the technical, the financial, the legal, all of the risks, etc., etc. And we need to understand that the social infrastructure project that's being proposed, one, it's needed and it's fit for purpose, and two, that the value for money and the affordability suggests that a PPP is the best option. If you don't have those things, then sooner or later something is going to go wrong. Either the project will be delayed, or in the worst case, it may fail altogether. I think the other thing that's really important is to have strong political support and strong political will to deliver a PPP, because they're complex, they take time, and frankly, they do need good international advisors, experienced international advisors. And this is what Satun was saying was one of the key things in the Saudi school PPP that made it a success. They bring not only the expertise, they bring the best international practice and give governments the best chance of succeeding with a PPP. They bring the standardized approaches, the fair and balanced risk allocation, all the things that are important for lenders. And, you know, when we look at what the lenders want, what EBRD wants, what the international lending community wants, what investors themselves want, they need to see that sustainability. So all those things that I was talking about that need to be in place, they're needed to make sure the PPP is sustainable, so they'll be looking for that. But they're also looking for a risk mitigated, consistent return over the long period. And so what they're going to do is they're going to gravitate to the markets and the sectors where they're going to find that. Now, certainly in emerging markets, you're never going to get the perfect scenario unless the country has a long history of PPPs, and there are very few that do. And so I think the best help that organizations like EBRD and other IFIs can do, and this goes back to our development role, is really help with the project preparation. And this is something, you know, we hosted last week a Global Infrastructure Hub forum, and you know, various of the audiences were polled on the panels to see what was the key factor that they wanted or they thought was the most important in building back better post-COVID in terms of infrastructure, social infrastructure. And they all said it was good project preparation, streamlined procurement processes, and bankability. So I think this is what we're looking for, and this is what is so important when you're bringing a PPP to the market, or government's bringing it to the market.
Fantastic. I'm actually going to bring it back to Sachin quickly, just to draw on your experience in Saudi, but also, of course, your overview of so many markets in the region. How also is some developments in the legal framework helping to support kind of appetite into some of these projects? Or indeed
sure.
is it?
Well, I think you know, historically there have been a few missteps on some of the PPP laws that have been passed, I think the key is, you know, we've seen the governments really focus on it. So we've seen PPP laws in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Qatar, in a variety of different markets, and in a lot of cases they're helpful. In some cases they actually introduce some conditionality to it that affects, you know, in some markets there are PPP laws that actually have had to be amended because the first time around they just didn't get it right, and that's still a feature. But I think the real focus is, you know, I think back to what Sue was saying, is what is the enabling environment? The enabling environment is more than just the law. It is having the unit, the PPP team at the government be of a high quality, to have processes in relation to approvals and financial support and budgets and feasibility, and all of those things need to be done. And I just wish, you know, if I get this a lot from different governments saying, you know, we've got a law, we're good to go. And I'm like, actually, no, what you really need is a high quality team. You need processes, you need guidebooks, you need training, you need to because once you're out in the transaction space, the private sector is judging you as a government, and they're saying, you know, do I want to have a long-term relationship with this government or this procuring entity? You know, are they going to close deals? And if you delay your deal or your deal fails, you lose credibility. And these investors and lenders, they're in, you know, they want to make money, right? They want to have success, and they'll just go to another market. And so the quality of your bidder and lender group will drop if you're not handling your PPP process and framework in the way that is best international practice and is credible and all the rest of it. But I wanted to kind of get Sue's view on that.
Yes, I agree with you. I think it's incredibly important to have a PPP unit which is well staffed with experienced people, and also people who have the authority to make decisions quickly, so that the projects can be processed in a very efficient way. The other point that I would add to that, though, is I think the line ministry that is responsible for delivering the PPP also needs to be well staffed and experienced, because typically they're the ones that are the actual counterpart in the PPP. And we've seen this in some markets where the line ministry, it's very good to have the PPP unit helping to put the PPP in place, but once it's in place, if you don't have the same strength and expertise within the line ministry that's implementing it, then you can get into trouble. And we've seen this in some PPPs where what's happened is that the line ministry has decided post-contract award that it's going to make the project bigger. And of course, not really respecting all of those contractual, considerations. Of course, the sponsor will think, oh, this is great. I've now got a bigger project. But then you have to back it up with if it's an availability payment that has budget implications. And so I think it's really important, as Sachin said, you've got to have that expertise, that I would say probably centralized expertise to really prepare and tender these PPPs. But you also need to think post-contracting, how well skilled is the line ministry that's actually implementing it, because not only can you have problems before you get to the market and you close the deal, post-deal you can have even bigger problems if you don't have the right expertise and knowledge of how these structures work once the PPP is in place.
You mentioned, and Dr. Musad also mentioned earlier, around kind of the human capital element and the delivery. So the building is one thing, the education and the healthcare is something separate. What amount of, or to what extent is service delivery playing a part in these contracts? I'm not sure where to start. Maybe Sue, I know we chatted about it a bit yesterday. I'll start with you, and then I'll move it to our colleagues that are working from the government point of view.
I would say for social infrastructure, and particularly if you think about hospitals, use hospitals as an example because this is where we have most experience. Actually, the service delivery, in other words, the healthcare provision, has to come from the government in a social infrastructure PPP. It's not something which is going to be provided by the infrastructure service provider. But I do think this comes back to the point I think Musad was mentioning it earlier around fit for purpose and thinking ahead as to what it is you're developing and how does it fit with the needs, the actual needs that need to come from this infrastructure. And I think what you have to be very careful of is that when you're designing a hospital, say, that the government needs to think ahead. How am I going to staff this hospital with doctors, nurses, technicians, skilled, unskilled labour? And is this hospital going to be fit for purpose? And these are really important issues, because the government simply cannot build the infrastructure and then wake up and think, oh, I don't have enough doctors, nurses, or whatever. I'll ask the private sector to provide them, because the infrastructure service provider will not provide those medical services, nor will the lenders accept it. So there has to be planning up front. And this is something that where we get involved in a healthcare program upstream. So, the examples that I would give at the moment, we're working with the Kazakhs, we're working with the Uzbeks on similar PPP programs to the one we see in Turkey. What we do is we provide the technical assistance to do that upfront healthcare planning. So on the one hand, we make sure that the project, that the infrastructure is fit for purpose, and we also make sure that the government is thinking about how are they going to run that hospital once it's developed. So I think these are really, really important issues.
Before we move over to Musad, thank you, Sue. I'm going to ask Dr. Musad, back to our healthcare specialist here. How are you seeing the service delivery element since you kind of initially referenced it? How is this working with any of the projects that you're involved in?
I think it is extremely missing, unfortunately. And what I would like to see from the regulators, and to take just Sue's idea a little bit further, is to put a contractual obligation in the PPP to make sure that within 5 years or what have you, a certain percentage of the executive branch of that particular project is made up of locals, right? And I think that is the only way that we can encourage this technology transfer in the long run. And it's not just, I think, we look at, for example, some of the manpower initiatives in the GCC, specifically Bahrain, Kuwait, or Emiratization in the UAE. And we noticed that it's very simple to say, okay, for every private sector enterprise, which again, many of them are built on these government contracts and servicing government requirements, to have a certain percentage of employees. And to me, that doesn't cut it, because you end up having a lot of locals from Kuwait, the UAE, or Bahrain just sitting at home collecting a paycheck because they're a secretary or an office manager in this company. And what I would like to see is that either we have a percentage of the total payroll of the company that should go to locals, or at least a percentage of the executive branch should be made up of locals. And then if you want to take it a bit further, I would also encourage to have a certain percentage of that to be women, and women, from the local populations, to encourage them and have leadership roles for women in many of these either public-private institutions or government-sponsored projects. So that would be kind of my take on the let's say the human capital issue.
Okay, fantastic. And I see, Dr. Musad, that there are questions coming in here for you. And I wanted to encourage everyone who's logged in watching to please continue to feel free to send any questions here in the chat box. I am going to start directing it to these shortly. So please keep those coming. Before I start on those, I'd like to just bring it back again to Musab in Saudi with your recent schools project. Do you have any comments regarding kind of the service delivery element? How much was that taken into consideration with education? Oh, I think your mute is on.
Thank you, Sarah. I think there are two, in my view, the delivery of the services that are being provided by private sector, there is an element of understanding where are the needs, and as Sue and Sachin mentioned earlier about the needs. Today we kind know the needs, the initial needs that need to be tackled, but in the future, when we have a maturity on the program, we need to have a tool that help us to guide us where to invest and where to build those assets or the infrastructure. The government today is taking the demand risk, similar to any other social infrastructure initiatives, without having a program that tells you where is your demand and how to build those infrastructure to meet your requirements. You will end up with something that built not for purpose. And we have seen some examples in the government where some of those assets built in areas that there is no demand for it. And I think one of number one priority for Saudi government is to make sure that demand is there for the school or the infrastructure, social infrastructure building, and just to avoid any similar situation that happened in the past.
Fantastic, thank you. Changing tack slightly here before on line and the questions that are coming in. COVID-19, this came up this morning quite a bit in terms of how it is or may not be affecting investor into social infrastructure projects in the region. Are we seeing any kind of increased demand for PPP? How is it impacting some of the appetite? Shall I start with here? I think I'll start with Sachin. Are you seeing any additional increased appetite in the region?
Sure. I think in my mind, we are seeing an enormous increase. I think I certainly have been practicing in the Middle East for 15 years, and I've never seen a market this buoyant for PPPs as we've seen in 2020. Is that COVID related or is that low oil price related? I think is a debatable issue. Certainly, I think what you have is partly COVID related and partly low oil price related is fiscal strain on a number of governments around the world, particularly governments that are pegged, that have dollar pegs, so they don't have the same kind of tools available to them in quantitative easing terms. And therefore, there is a renewed focus as to, am I getting the most value for money for the revenues that are available to the government? There are lots of different uses for that money, and in Saudi Arabia they've got big programs on new cities, big programs on entertainment, on a whole manner of things that they've got competing demands on that capital. Same with the UAE, same in Kuwait to a certain extent. And so the government's looking at this and saying, is there a way that I can procure my assets in a cost-effective way, and in a way that harnesses the power of the private sector and the expertise that comes with best-in-class international solutions. So I think this is a wake-up moment for. This is a standout year for Saudi Arabia. It's just done its first one. That's its commercial close. I know we're advising the governments in Abu Dhabi, and they've just signed one, and there's a big program coming out in Abu Dhabi that's going to be super exciting. We've advised the government in Dubai on their social infrastructure. We're currently advising the government in Dubai on social infrastructure, and these are all unique programs where I know Oman is looking at them. I know in some of the other countries they're looking at. We're involved in Kuwait on social infrastructure. So this is happening, and what we're going to see is the ball is rolling, and you're going to have I think enormous pipeline of projects that are coming, and I think it's very, very exciting.
Thank you very much. I want to turn this over to Sue, but I'm seeming to have some problems with your video. I don't know if that's accidentally been turned off your side, or if it's an error on my side. Okay, it might just be my side. So please go ahead, Sue. I'd like to get your thoughts on the same.
Let me go ahead. And if others can't hear me, maybe they can jump in.
I can hear you.
Yeah, good. I mean, I would say that COVID is having a number of sort of interesting effects on the market. Certainly what we saw, but this is not so much in PPPs, we saw some of the project preparation being impacted by COVID due to the fact that consultants and specialists were not able to do the due diligence. So we've seen sort of some delay. Having said that, G20 interestingly commissioned the Global Infrastructure Hub to do some research recently on what is the best form of spending post COVID to really kickstart growth and creation of jobs. And they employed a number of economists to look at this, and they found strong historical evidence that spending on infrastructure is the most effective way that a government can create fiscal stimulus. So I think in any case, governments are going to be looking to infrastructure to create that post-COVID era of trying to kickstart economic growth. But then when you think about the social infrastructure sector, and again going back to healthcare, what COVID-19 has done has really shone a light on the inadequacy of healthcare infrastructure around the world, not just in the developing world. And so I think what we are likely to see is this combination of needing to kickstart economies, but also needing to think about how well prepared are we for future waves of COVID or any other pandemics that come, because it's no good having trying to run an economy if the health of the people that are trying to run it is not there. So I think there will be a focus on social infrastructure going forward. And as Sachin was mentioning, the fact that COVID has had a dramatic impact on government budgets is also focusing attention on PPP. So I fully agree with what Sachin was saying, that governments will be looking at PPPs as a way to deliver affordable and efficient infrastructure in a constrained environment. And we see that, I mentioned earlier, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. These are areas where the governments are moving ahead with healthcare programs. We see it in other sectors as well, though. And one thing that's quite interesting for me, completely outside of the social infrastructure space, we even see some governments going ahead with airport PPPs, which is quite extraordinary in this current environment. But there is a sense that the infrastructure needs to create the stimulus, and it does need to be done in an effective way. I think another interesting thing that we have seen with COVID-19 is that what it has meant is that green and sustainability has taken a back seat. But what's interesting about that is it's been so dramatic that it hasn't gone unnoticed. And so people are now starting to worry about this green agenda, which has been forgotten. And what we see in the EBRD, for example, is last year we were riding high in terms of the amount of green investment we were doing. This year that has slumped. And if anything, that has given us more of an impetus to make sure we build back better. So I think green is going to come back better. And a project that is going to be the way in which we build back better. And one of the projects, for example, that we are currently looking at in the social infrastructure space is energy efficiency in buildings and how that can be delivered through PPP solutions. So we're currently working on a project with schools in Turkey, with the Turkish government, where we will start to introduce performance elements, transfer of performance risk to private contractors as a precursor to establishing energy service companies, or ESCO PPPs. And in the background, we are working on the legislation to provide the enabling environment so these can be taken forward. So I think it's another interesting way in which COVID-19 is pushing forward on agendas that were there already, and it will now, I think, increase the pace with which we focus on green, and that can also be achieved through PPP structures in the social infrastructure space.
Yeah, it's certainly something what we've been hearing quite a lot about in terms of everyone having a bit of an opportunity to pause and to reflect and to see how behaviors can change, how traditional patterns of commuting, for example, and how we're looking at different contracts, et cetera, could be reviewed, and the ways that we're working, et cetera, to make things more efficient, more green as well. So that's really interesting to hear. Dr. Musad, I want to bring it back to you, please, because obviously healthcare and the COVID situation, it's more important than ever. Please, can you tell us what your thoughts are in terms of how COVID has impacted kind of PPP in hospitals and healthcare?
I think in general, we've seen a tremendous slowdown in the government operations, I would say in general, let alone the PPP side, specifically here in Kuwait, and I would say echoing throughout the region. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that we will return to the new normal anytime before Q2 or even maybe Q3 of next year. Yeah. Keep in mind that we will not have a vaccine for the virus available even on an emergency basis before April of next year. You know, whatever press releases we have seen that promised a vaccine in the fall, I think now have been, unfortunately proven wrong. Although there are rumors of some of it being available on an emergency basis already to certain high-level members of the government and different military organizations. So globally, we won't see a vaccine until April of next year. Most likely here in the Middle East, we will have a 3 to 6 month delay despite our best efforts and despite the efforts of other international organizations like Gavi, for example. And so by extension, we do not probably, then we'll get into Ramadan and the summer break here in the Middle East. So most likely we won't see a resurgence of activity until the fall of next year. So hopefully, around the same time in 2021. Now, in general, I think given the lack of success of a lot of the government PPP projects, which we saw mushrooming at the end of 2008, after the previous financial crisis when oil went down from $147 per barrel, crashing down all the way to the high 60s, and now we're at the 40s. It seems that, it's very cyclical. When the oil price goes down, interest in PPP tends to go up. And certainly we are approaching that cycle. But again, we hope that we will learn from the mistakes of 2008, 2010, and come up with these new models that I had mentioned earlier. I know there was a question here by Rajesh, and I don't know if you saw my answer. Yes. But currently in Kuwait, really there is no projects underway, right? Because even the government is operating at 30% capacity in many of its institutions. So the best you can do is now at least go through the initial, let's say, requirements of registering through the Kuwait Authority for Partnerships, for Partnership Projects, KAPP. And I sent the link there. The link is kapp.gov.kw. And this will give you an information about different PPPs in different government sectors. And there are similar institutions across the GCC and across the MENA region as well. The second choice then for any international company is to decide, do they want to apply for this PPP, let's say hopefully next year when things return to the new normal, as an international company, or do they want to partner with a local consortium and a local company as part of the consortium, let's say. In Kuwait, there is an option for international companies to go and essentially do business in Kuwait under their own license. And that is the second link I had sent, which is the Kuwait Direct Investment, the Kuwait Direct Investment Promotion Authority, KDIPA. Both KDIPA and CAP are part of the Ministry of Finance, and both are extremely well-run institutions that can really support international companies that want to come invest in the future of Kuwait and the Kuwait Vision 2030. In terms of the second option, there are multiple, both state-owned enterprises such as our company, as well as many family-run organizations that are all eagerly waiting to partner with either international construction companies, operating companies, or even investment companies to again pursue different government PPPs. So those are the two options broadly, and I think a similar model can be found in many GCC and Middle Eastern countries as well.
Fantastic, and I think that was a really important question, and one that I'm also going to direct to Musad. Musad, we had the National Center for Privatization participating in a session this morning. You also mentioned that Tatware company is getting involved or looking to perhaps expand outside of just education projects. What do you see as mainly the projects that you have coming up? Is there a pipeline in place? Sectors you're looking at moving into, and how can the international community get involved?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. The general authority who's looking after the PPP in Saudi is NCP, and they are quite active on that. And their website, they post all the upcoming projects on their website. I cannot speak on their behalf. However, in TBC currently, we have approved program, as I said, 1,500 schools, and we are rolling this program as we go. The announcement of this program is posted on our website, on our Twitter account, and TBC's Twitter accounts, as well as on NCP's website and Twitter account. We also looking to research and find out where we can add value within the government of Saudi Arabia, who they need similar infrastructure program. We are now talking to, it's not only schools, we are talking to universities. In fact, now we are talking to, at this moment, there is a meeting going on with one of the universities to develop a program for them. It's not only universities, we're also talking to other ministries, as I mentioned, Ministry of Tourism. We have a program there with them. We're looking for for ways to help them to develop their PPP program as well. All that is coming in the picture, inshallah, very soon. But the one we have and we are proud of is the school program that we already launched successfully, close it, and we have now wave 2, or the next transaction is coming in the next few weeks.
Fantastic. I think we've more or less reached the end of our session. Before we go, I want to ask each of the panelists to take a minute just to maybe contribute any final thoughts. Sue, please.
Well, I would actually be very interested to talk more to Satun and Musad, because one of the things that we are developing in the region with the Jordanian government actually is a PPP, a school PPP program. So we're working together with the IFC. The reason that the government is now focusing on school PPPs is because they've had obviously a huge influx of refugees. The population is growing, the existing system is creaking at the seams, and so we're working on a pilot. I mean, over 10 years they estimate they'll need around 600 schools, and we're working with them to develop just 15 under a pilot phase. So I'd be very interested to look at the experience in Saudi and see how you've done it, and see if there are any lessons that we can learn in Jordan. But overall, I think this has been a very powerful panel, and thank you very much for asking me to participate. It's been a very interesting discussion. I think there have been some very good points that have been raised by all panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sachin, please, a few words to close the session.
Look, I think it's an exciting time to be in the industry. I think there are lots. There is lots happening. I'm aware of a number of things on just because we're advising on it that I can't share because of client confidentiality. But watch this space. There are many projects that you will see come to market very soon. We're working with governments on many of them, and we're going to see the sector is going to grow multifold, I think, over the next 2 to 3 years, and it's a very exciting time to be part of the PPP sector, particularly on social infrastructure. So I'm excited for everyone.
Well, lovely, thank you. And Dr. Musad.
So I would just echo again the point I made about making sure that the human capital element is one of the main pillars of the public-private partnership, and then to also encourage the development of new technologies. I mean, for example, starting a project for 1,500 schools is great, but then the students can't even go to school because of social distancing. So having a important, let's say, teleeducation component to that will be, I think, very important. Similar to hospitals, doesn't make sense to build a huge hospital when we can, encourage telemedicine and different telediagnostics as well. So that would be kind of the high level from my side.
Okay, fantastic. And Musad, please.
Thank you, Sarah. And I just echo my colleagues' note here, and we are looking forward to for people to come and see what we have on the pipeline. And I would like to thank you, Sarah, and the MEED team for inviting me to participate with this wonderful group. And wish you all the best luck.
And thank you, and congratulations, of course, to you with the successful close of the school's PPP last week. That's really exciting news, and I think hopefully, setting a great precedent for the rest of the region with successful projects in the future here. That's all the time we have. There's never enough time, and I think with the panelists we have here today and with so much happening in the market, we probably could have done a whole day just on the social infrastructure topic. So thank you very much to each of our panelists. We're really grateful that you were able to join us. Thank you to everyone who was able to attend and who logged in.